Mushoku Tensei Episode 16, Rudy meets Paul, so time for the juicy drama. But why did it feel like an episode's worth of content got skipped? So go ahead and smash that thumbs up for Best Girl Roxy, no sponsor today. And by the way, my Roxy video on her life before she met Rudy is now up. Find out tons that the anime skipped. Getting into something skipped about Geese. So you actually had Geese and Rudy being really chummy during the trip, getting ultra friendly. In the anime, I feel like you wouldn't know these two were that close. Rudy actually said he made his life a lot less stressful during that long trip. During their long journey, everyone had a role. As expected, Richard would get their ingredients ready, Rudy was in charge of fire and water, so this guy had it easy. Geese was their Michelin star chef, while the only thing Eris had to do was gather wood and train. So can you blame the girl for being super bored? Not that Eris was slagging off. Throughout the road trip, Eris was constantly training. She was actually practicing the repetitive drills given by Ghislaine. And talk about dedication, she was doing her sword swingings for hours. Not that it made it any more exciting. I joked about this guy being on Michelin star level, but make no mistake, Geese was a super skilled cook. Rudy actually thought his skills were enough to open his own restaurant. Your shirt wouldn't be exploding off, you wouldn't have this foodgasm, but his restaurant might be moderately popular in the neighborhood. As for a more important skip, you actually saw anime Eris asking to cook. Can you teach me please? I was almost shocked that the anime didn't bother to explain why Geese didn't want to teach her. I felt that this was some clever world building. It turns out that Geese actually was set on never teaching someone to cook again. It all goes back to his original party, that there was a certain lady in the party that wanted to learn. Her goal was to get to the man's heart through his stomach. Geese didn't think too much about it, why not? But this eventually led to the woman getting the guy, the two getting married, and then the party got destroyed shortly after. Which actually gets into a depressing aftermath for Geese. That Geese was this guy that could do anything, although he didn't really have the talent for sword or magic. Post a party breakup, even though he was a somewhat well-known adventurer, no party would actually pick him up. That's when Geese realized that the party he was in was the only place he belonged. He realized he was actually filling a role in the party that the other guys lacked. Ultimately, this was a dead end for his adventurer career, which is now why he lived by gambling. And that is why Geese refuses to teach females how to cook. Rudy went ahead and followed up on this. Was their female party member not happy? I was actually surprised at his response. But who knows, she could have been happy or not, he never saw her after that. But a major reason for Geese is that he felt that the guy didn't turn out happy. And I do apologize, this is a little long, but it is setting subtle things up for the future. In comparison, now you can see why I think Geese has been gutted in the anime version. As for some world building about the horses here. The horses of this isekai were so efficient, they had so much stamina. They could run for like 10 hours in a day without stopping. The Survey Corps could have used some of these. And then keep on going the next day. Rudy wondered whether some magic was involved. For something the anime skipped about Rudy, let's just say Rudy had a certain pain in the ass during this adventure. For something skipped related to Eris's training, throughout their trip, supposedly Eris spent a good amount of time on top of the carriage. Rudy claimed it was dangerous, but Eris claimed it was part of some balanced training, which gave new respect to him for Eris. For one of their stops the anime skipped, a little bit past the Blue Mountains, they actually stopped in this location run by dwarves. This place did not have an adventurers guild. On the other hand, since this was run by dwarves, they were known for their weapons and armor. Further world building skipped. Depending on where they went, they could have headed to a large dwarf town, an area populated by elves, or even a place with hobbits. For some Japanese nostalgia, hey, it turns out they could have actually reached a hot spring. That if they actually headed to the mountains, they might have been able to find an onsen, which ultimately led to a Rudy moment skipped. He was hoping just a little bit that the hot spring might have been mixed. You know this guy, never missing a chance to potentially get a peek at Eris. Ultimately, these guys decided to go straight to the Millis capital. The main reason was that the rainy season had just ended, which would have meant the mountains would have been such a mess at the moment. After all, these guys were not used to traveling in the mountains. Next up, getting into the Millis continent. Once again, I do love the anime showing you visuals in place of the opening, but let's dive into the actual world building details. First off, you'll notice the Millis continent surrounded by so much water, the rivers. This was actually coming from the Blue Mountains I mentioned earlier. The Great Palace in the center was floating above the waters. The anime did showcase two major spots here. One of them being the city's shining cathedral, and the other guild that might have looked like a church, that's actually the Adventurers Guild. This whole city on water and boats actually reminds me of a certain SAO floor. According to one of Rudy's past books, the Millis capital was not only rich in majesty, but it was also in perfect harmony with nature, that no other city in the world was nearly as beautiful. This being a passage from one of Rudy's early books. It was by the adventurer Bloody Kent. Find out more about her in my Roxy video. And you might have noticed those towers that look like control spires. Rudy wondered if the 3 months of rain would have been an issue to the city. But it turns out that these 7 magic towers actually have the weather under control. The towers are protecting the city with this magic barrier. Supposedly the capital is safe from natural disasters and even epidemics. We could use some of that. For the actual city, it's actually divided into 4 distinct districts. To the north, you have the residential district. To the east, you have the commercial district. This is where you can find the major businesses. To the south is the adventurers district. So if you need to find the guild, head over there. Notably, you could also find the slave market here. So not so holy, eh? And then to the west side, you can find the divine district, which is home to a lot of the Millis Church ranking members. The Holy Knights of Millis are also stationed here. Next up, another familiar anime change with Geese. You just saw Geese ditching them before they even entered the city. Originally, light novel Geese stuck around. He actually even went ahead and explained the town. Since the anime has been vague on dates, just know it took them like 2 months to get from the Great Forest over to this city. I don't know, but in the anime it feels like it was almost instant. Anyway, time for their lodging situation. This time, Rudy actually went ahead and splurged a little bit. They stayed away from the slums in this inn called the Dawn's Light Inn. They actually had saved quite a bit of coin, as they were hunting monsters in the village. In total, more than 7 gold coins. So getting on to their dead-end meeting. A fun change for this was how anime Eris looked so happy. But originally after a year over these isekai Zoom-like meetings, both of them were totally done. You heard Rudy talk about how they should stay here and build funds for a while, but there was a lot more to it. I'm surprised they skipped this, but they still do have a very long journey ahead. The distance between Millis and their destination was roughly 1/4 of the way around the world. In other words, Rudy estimated them having around a solid year of travel ahead of them. Once again, you have the anime making this trip look like a piece of Rem's cake. No wonder Papa Paul got so pissed off later. Another important detail to notice is just the difference in prices. You heard me mention last time how the Demon Continent was a lot cheaper in comparison to the human territory. I mean, lodging was going from a third world country to maybe like Japan or the US. Something you may have spotted this episode is a focus on the Richard figure. This scene was almost the exact opposite of the light novel Rudy talk. Since they were in a city that despises demons, trying to improve the reputation for the Super would have to be put on hold. In fact, in the light novel, they never mention anything about the Richard figure business. Not that I mind this anime change. Go for it, Rudy, preach the Japanese figure culture to these isekai people. Then, for Rudy reflecting on taking a day off, you might have recalled him originally setting up this day off for Eris. But the reality was that Rudy definitely considered himself being the weakest of the party. This also included being mentally drained. You saw Rudy reflecting on how he still had issues about killing living things. This included taking out monsters, so taking a day off wasn't limited to writing the letter. Talking about the letter, here is one of the major problems the anime skipped. It turns out their postal system needs some work. That back when Roxy and him were sending letters back and forth, the system was so bad that maybe 1 in 7 letters actually made it. Could you imagine Amazon losing 6 of your packages? Which means they just gotta send multiple copies. Switching over to Eris, wanting to become Goblin Slayer. Here's the goblin info the anime skipped. The goblins were pretty much thought as vermin. Goblins are actually able to communicate verbally, but most of them behave like wild animals. These guys don't live on the Demon Continent, so Rudy had actually never seen one. Goblins are officially ranked E, but supposedly even a child with basic skills could handle them. For a skip Rudy moment, that if he was a lucky goblin who happened to knock out Eris, he might actually get lucky that day. But still, Rudy was overprotective of Eris, that if something terrible happened to her, he would never be able to face Ghislaine or her father again. In the anime, you saw Richard being fine with it. In the last year and a half, Richard had been personally training Eris, so at this point she was more than capable of fighting different monsters and enemies. You may get to see this next episode. For something the anime skipped completely related to Richard, it turns out he was going to go play with an acquaintance of his in the city. Which shouldn't be surprising, someone over 500 years old? That just means this fella has a lot of contacts. Richard mentioned this person was a warrior. Moving along, you did have the anime skip a whole ton of world building and info about food. No surprise, food was actually cheaper here than on the Demon Continent. Not to mention the selection being much better. You had things like fresh meat, fresh fish, and even veggies. One of the standout things is that not only did they have eggs, but the eggs were cheap. The only time Rudy previously saw eggs on the Demon Continent happened to be eggs laid by monsters, not chickens. And then for his Japanese cravings kicking in. Poor dude, he was dying to eat egg on rice again, which I'm sure he means raw egg. And I'm sorry, I can't do that even after 3 years in Japan. But don't worry, if the guy gets sick, he could just detox himself with his magic. How convenient. One of the main Japanese cravings Rudy had was for rice and soy sauce. He did drop that it was a staple food in the northern and eastern regions of the central continent. Anyway, finally getting to writing the letter. Rudy finally thought about Ghislaine's whereabouts. Recall Ghislaine being with them at the time, but hopefully Ghislaine didn't get dropped in the middle of a volcano, although this being Ghislaine, likely she was okay. The anime showed you a little later that Rudy was completely in the dark about the displacement incident. But in the light novel here, I do need to emphasize that Rudy finally got a real chance to think about what happened. He did start to consider others possibly being whisked away, like people from Eris's household. For something else the anime skipped, since they were going to stay a while, he did start thinking about some possible date locations for Eris in the future. I mean, why not build up some brownie points? Anyway, getting back into the main plot. In the anime, Rudy spotted the horse and someone that supposedly was kidnapped. Compare this to the light novel Rudy, where he was just wandering around the city. He actually bumped into these guys, but he got out of their way. He wanted to avoid a fight with these a-holes. As for the slave topic being brought up, and you thought Shield Hero was bad, here's the complete breakdown. Kidnapping could actually make you quite a bit of money. You did have a couple of slaves coming into the market, but it simply did not meet the demand. Specifically, you did have wealthy people in Milis and Asura who were constantly looking to buy people, which was really just a vicious cycle. There were a lot of rich nobles looking to buy slaves, and not so good people looking to make a little coin. So without this massive war, this whole slave situation would not be going away. Anyway, back on following the kidnappers. You did get a little info on Rudy's sneaking skills. Apparently this got quite an update since he was stalking Eris so much, or what Rudy calls practicing. For the actual location, hey, they went to this rundown looking church. Originally this was a warehouse in the Adventurer District. For an anime change, you did see Rudy breaking in Full Metal Alchemist style. Light novel Rudy did give this Edward vibe, but in a different way. He used earth magic to lift himself up the ground, and then slip through the window. In the light novel, this guy did not have a robe, and he did not have his staff. As for that weird Rudy monologue on the crate, this was actually a Rome Stole reference, aka something from a very old mech anime. I think it would go over the head of like 90% of anime people. For an interesting new anime addition, you did have that undie line about those belonging to her. And then you just had anime Rudy going down on the poor piece of fabric. Come on Rudy, those don't belong to Roxy. For a fight scene the anime completely skipped. You originally had Rudy coming up with a plan to get Miss Bikini here to put on some layers, since she was super distracting. He went ahead and used his Icicle Field, and then combined it with Blast Wind. The result was this combination spell, Polar Blast. The idea was to make the warehouse super chilly so she put on clothing. And guess what, Rudy's plan actually succeeded, you had her coating up. But too bad Papa Bear came in. So getting into it, a major Paul change, his weapon choice. Light novel Paul was originally freaking dual blading. Come on, why change this up? Light novel fans know what's up. For some attention to detail here, you saw Paul deflecting Rudy's stone cannon. This is a water god style. For an anime skip here, you had Rudy pulling off some beast folk vocal magic to temporarily stun Paul. You actually did have the two girls joining into the fight, and then Rudy have to deal with their combined assault. Rudy went ahead and knocked out Miss Magician here, but the Amazon was ready for more pounding. As for Paul going in for the one-hit kill, you should notice that without his demon eye, Rudy would have been dead. That thing saved his life. Paul was not holding back. And really props to the anime, I just love how trashed Paul looked. Come on, you can't say he didn't look like an entirely different person. Maybe like Paul's skinnier adventurer brother. Don't let that go unnoticed, Paul really slimmed down since losing his family. Before moving forward, I should mention that the anime completely cut out Paul's point of view before meeting Rudy. It is probably enough content to be its own video, it was 20 plus pages. So if you do want to see me cover this, smash that thumbs up. If enough of you are interested, I might do a quick rundown on the second channel later this week. Maybe even tomorrow. Anyway, finally things chilling out. Something fun to notice here is the location. Hey, they were actually staying right next to Rudy's inn. What a coincidence. Hopefully you notice all of these guys awkwardly staring. It turns out that all of these guys are part of Paul's crew. In other words, the guys that Rudy knocked out. For the bikini lady, oh, there's some fun world building here. It turns out the bikini armor wasn't so rare in Mushoku Land. I mean, why would it when injuries could be healed by magic? Rudy actually met some people like that on the Demon Continent. Although normally you wouldn't put it all out there. I get a feeling the anime is gonna skip the reason. There actually is a sad explanation of why she's like that. Anyway, getting to the juicy family talk. Family drama is always a bunch of joy in anime. Rudy had no idea why Paul was in this Milis city. Rudy was still thinking that only he and Eris got teleported. On the flip side, for Paul's point of view, you saw him asking if he saw the message. At this point, Paul had spammed that message everywhere, including guilds. It's really just a shame that Rudy got kidnapped shortly after arriving to the Millis continent. This is why he completely missed it. For something that I felt was unclear in the anime, you did see Rudy lay out the 3 main parts of the story of his fun adventure. Except Paul cut Rudy off before he actually got to the kidnapping part. So Paul never got why Rudy didn't see his message. Ultimately, the main issue here was that Rudy didn't want Paul to worry, which is why he brightened up his story so much. Huge mistake, dude. So why did Rudy not look for others? Simple, Rudy was in the dark about the displacement incident. The guy did not know. For an anime skip, they cut out Paul taking his medicine after that panty hero comment, and then just busting a fat one on the floor. The anime skipped this twice. Come on, where is the Dune hospitality? Back to Rudy, the anime skipped some info about Eris, that there could have possibly been another way. If only they had tried to talk to someone important after they got to the port. They might have been able to get some assistance, like a bodyguard, maybe some cash. Rudy thought that he was doing the best in the situation he was given, that Paul didn't have any right to criticize him. I mean, at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know. And right before Rudy threw that cheating punch, he first thought about himself, how he didn't lay any finger on Eris. Sure, he was tempted, but he never touched her. Then getting to the conclusion of the fight, you just had Paul bouncing like a fricking ball. Aw, they didn't have him crashing into the bar with his friendly booze. Which also meant the anime skipped the other mage girl coming in to help aid Paul. You won't be surprised this actually led to another cheating accusation from Rudy. Another woman? And then the conclusion. You had Rudy doing the shoulder throw move on Papa, fueled by wind magic. No bouncy ball here. I'm just wondering, did anime Rudy go soft on him? You didn't have a bloody Paul. Not that this guy didn't already look like a dumpster. So getting into it, you have poor Norm coming in, just seeing Papa getting a street beatdown. So take a look, you have 3 visual versions of this. And I'm super curious, let me know below which do you think is the best. I'm gonna be Mr. Unpopular. I really love the 2 with the daughter shielding Papa. It just added that extra Anyway, getting into Rudy finding out about the tragedy. You heard him bring up Sophie. This is partly since he thought his mother would have already been found by Paula. Then for some more slave world building, the Displacement Incident Edition. You did actually have Paul and his people go to where their people were enslaved by their owner and try to convince them to get released. A lot of these people just refused to give up their quote-unquote property. This is really diving more into the slave law of Millis. That no matter how you ended up as a slave, you were nothing more than private property. This ultimately meant that Paul had to be forceful. Stealing a slave was a crime, but there was a loophole, and Paul's group had actually taken advantage of that to save many people. And sure, if someone wanted to remain a slave, they would leave them alone, but practically every one of their people that got enslaved wished to go back. And here's some karma for you. You actually had that former bully that was working that booty. No wonder that dude was broken. So with all of the things going on with Paul's group, Paul was actually making quite the number of enemies with nobles. As for Rudy here at the end, you had the guy putting 2 and 2 together. The conclusion he came up with was that he prioritized Richard, that he prioritized his reputation over this whole incident. Next up, Rudy back at the inn after that mental beatdown. So quite a few change-ups here for the anime. Richard was also originally going to show something important to Rudy. You heard Eris say that she was going to go slice up Paul, and in the light novel she actually made an attempt to go do so, only to be stopped by their Naruto extra. For that Eris hug, not groundbreaking, but originally Eris did wrap her arms from behind Rudy. Unfortunately, the anime didn't include what Rudy was thinking during the hug. He thought back to all the time they spent together, that the smell was very familiar, that right now it was really comforting. His family had rejected Rudy due to their fear, but now those feelings were starting to melt away. Perhaps Eris was considered family too. If only Eris had been in his previous life. Perhaps then he could have escaped his misery much sooner. For a fun tidbit for Eris, she did have quite the sword warrior hands, as expected from all the training. So how much did you enjoy this family reunion with Rudy and Paul? Did the anime skip too much, or was it just right? I'm even more curious if you're a reader. So I did go ahead and rush this out, got like 4 hours of sleep. It's not a day, but under a day and a half later. So again, if you do enjoy these, do hit that like. It does help to make this video reach more people. And definitely do check out Friday's video going over Roxy, which actually has no spoilers. It does include a ton of info that you should know by now if the anime didn't skip it. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss future anime videos, and I'll see you guys later.